I am a survivor of child sex abuse, of sex trafficking, of satanic ritual abuse. And that was my family. I was born into that situation. So from birth to about 37 years old, I was being accessed. And then the satanic ritual cult that I grew up in is also really adept at this. There's planning, there is complete control of what they're doing, how they're doing it.
And joining us now is Raine, an SRA, satanic ritual abuse, and MK Ultra survivor. Welcome, Asia.
Hi, hello.
We were just talking about The Sound of Freedom and with Tim Ballard's role, and of course his heroic portrayal of this blockbuster Sound of Freedom has triggered you, but not so much like most other Americans who have watched the movie, but yours is more with pause and with doubt. So to explain that, let's talk first about your experience in your life that perhaps could help explain why you doubt and have pause on the sex trafficking of children and who's behind the portrayal in this movie.
Well, you've said that correctly. I did raise an eyebrow to what and how that was all coming forward and coming out, because I am a survivor of sex abuse, of sex trafficking, of satanic ritual abuse, mind control, and human experimentation. And that was my family. I was born into that situation. So from birth to about 37 years old, I was being accessed. It may or may not have been consistent all the time, but when you're available to the brotherhood or to your handlers, to that group, they will definitely access who they want to access anytime they want to access, because there's a specific way to create personalities in people and in children, and breaking them off through really horrendous and traumatic experiences, as well as sexual violations. And what that kind of training and conditioning open a child up to is splitting off into multiple personalities that can actually be programmed and created. And so the MK Ultra mind programming is really adept at this. And then the satanic ritual cult that I grew up in is also really adept at this. There's planning, there is complete control of what they're doing, how they're doing it, and then observation of every child and their personality that they choose to actually access and program and condition. They're going to have these customized robots, is a good way to put it, but they customize the torture, they customize the personality creations per child, because if you have a child that is a little more gregarious and outgoing, just naturally, that child will be utilized and exploited based on that personality, versus a child that might be a little more aggressive or a little more reserved. And so their army and the programs that they create are actually something that are focused on the children, and these children grow into teenagers that are utilized, and then young adults, and then adults. And this is something that you don't age out of. You have to recognize, see it, extract yourself, and heal from. And that's not exactly the easiest process to do. And so because of the background that I have and the process that I went through to actually heal and recognize and see what was going on in my life, because that part of my life was completely repressed. I had no idea that was happening with me.
And most survivors, especially of satanic ritual abuse, and it seems like MK Ultra, those trauma-based mind controls is the number one tool they use in SRA in the satanic ritual abuse, is to control and utilize and use these children and later adults for their bidding, for whatever they're a sex assassin or they're just sex trafficked, or they use for information, intel, whatever it may be. As we know, it's their own level of gathering information and utilizing these kids to do their dirty work. You specifically, though, Asia, you were born in what type of a religion and family that was part of this SRA?
So the religion that I was born into was the Mormon Church, or the Church of Latter-day Saints. Some people call it the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. You may recognize or know of the Mormons based on the missionaries that people are familiar with. They're the young women and the young men, 18 to 20 years old, that walk around in pairs and do a lot of proselyting, want to kind of educate people about the church and then convert them to the church. So that was the institution that I was born into. That is the family dynamic that I was born into. And that was also the structure through which the satanic ritual, blood cult rituals, and the training and the mind control fell within. So there's a framework that's also customizable. So I was born into that particular religion, but if I had been born into Catholicism, it would actually take on that kind of flavor. If I was born into a different religion, it would actually be structured according to the religion.
So there are SRA networks, and you're saying in Mormons, in Catholicism, in Judaism, in Christianity, in all these different levels. But so you would not say the Mormon Church is an SRA belief system. You're saying there are SRA, there are satanic rituals, abuses, and people who are just infiltrated that or involved in that. How would you describe the overall? Tim Ballard, of course, is a Mormon, and he's out here sharing this information as well. So
that question that you asked is a really good way to structure this, because there is a belief system. So the cover of any of the religions, and we'll just kind of keep it in a religious factor, even though this satanic ritual blood cult brotherhood is everywhere in everything, and it doesn't have to be just religious. But the structure that I was born into was from the Mormon Church. And the belief system of the Mormon Church would be kind of the surface, just comparing it to Catholicism. The belief system, Catholicism is the surface, Mormonism is the surface, but underneath it, there is this really deep, dark cult activity where all of the loyalty really, truly is. And so you may be a member of the Mormon Church and not connected to the Brotherhood, and this kind of information would be completely appalling and very easy to disbelieve, because your experience as an average, everyday good human Mormon going to church and living the belief system is not going to be at all connected to or even familiarized with what is happening underground or under the surface.
You just wouldn't believe it. You would just deny that person's
There's
crazy.
no way. Yeah. Absolutely. So when I come forward and I say the things that I say, and I say, and the people that I was interacting with and the ones that were abusing me and taking me into rituals, it wasn't just my family. It was this network, and this network is branched up into and infiltrated into the Mormon Church. The infiltration, though, happened a long time ago. I would say probably from the inception of the church, but it got very formalized in the, I would say in the 50s or even earlier than that, when the church actually connected with the government to really do more of I call it a social experiment. Let's see what it looks like to mind control an entire society. And it worked out really well, apparently, but the government's involved with this. And so just even the way the church itself presents its doctrine now in, like over the pulpit, over the broadcasting system that it owns, there are things piggybacking on that. So there's like frequency warfare that happens. There is harmonics that they push out. There are relative experiences that happen. So with every ordinance, every worship, a lot of the songs, a lot of the things that Mormons recite for rote, there's going to be that surface belief and surface practice, but underneath it's been inverted. And so I was baptized in blood and in a satanic ritual before or right around when I was 8 years old, because the Mormons baptized their children at 8 years old. So my baptism happened in blood before it happened on the surface in the way everybody else was connecting with and recognizing. When I was baptized and confirmed, I was baptized in water. The inversion and the things that happened during that ceremony and the things that I was told were very horrific, and the being blown open emotionally, being under the influence of drugs, being in a space where I've already been trained to dissociate those kinds of things, I'm open to hearing what it is that I was being told during the baptism, which is blood is thicker than water, and this will never be washed away. You're baptized to Lucifer. Jesus can't reach you. Jesus won't save you. And then at the same time, they do this really strange, twisted thing, at least to me, where the baptism, I was standing in like a little kiddie pool, a basin to catch the blood that they were pouring all over me. And it was around my neck and down my body. So then at the end, they actually did put a crown of thorns on my head and replicated what I learned about, with even Jesus being sacrificed on the cross is the way they prefer to refer to it. And then they poured blood on my head. And so it was like a mockery of what I would attend and learn about in church. And so whenever I would go to church on the surface, right, in my waking consciousness, I would hear the same words. I would learn about baptism. I would learn about, singing the songs. And what that was doing was re-triggering the trauma related to it that I had experienced previously. And it just drives that trauma in even deeper because the cognitive dissonance is so massive and the trauma is so unpleasant that you've got a trauma brain that's working at one point and then that closes down and your physical system shifts into waking, and so now you have so there's a lot of things that are happening physiologically that,
and of course,
that they already know is going to work. Yes,
and of course, done purposefully ahead of time, knowing that you'll get this other level of understanding or indoctrination into the positive side of, let's say, of church. They try to. What you're saying is. Get to you first so that it will trigger more trauma for you to have a negative perspective of what they're saying, where other people would have more of a positive experience. Yours is becoming more negative. And they, of course, do this I guess, typical protocol with SRA survivors. They do this across the board to 1,000, 100,000, millions of people around the world who are involved in the network here. So fascinating how that actually operates. And then I want to hear some more examples of that. But first tell me, you said in the Mormon Church, maybe more of a kind of an experiment, especially working with the government, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But how far up were your actual experience with the people in the Mormon Church? How far up were you being sex trafficked, or describe your experiences outside of your abuse by your parents?
My experience was with the top level leadership of the church.
Wow.
So when I was chosen by them, and the selection process for me personally happened through Romper Room. I was taken to be on that program when I was 5, and they're filming the children, and that filming or that material was then viewed by, in my case, a high level member of the leadership of the church in the top 15. And I know that they actually were previewing all of the children. I just know that because I had been born into a family and had the training, and I hate to say that like that, the programming and the conditioning that I had been through because of family experiences, because of focused MK Ultra protocol, that I was one of those that could be chosen or could be selected. It didn't mean I was guaranteed anything, but I was actually chosen by a very high-level official. After watching me interacting, whatever it was, maybe he liked my looks as well. And so I was selected, and my family was informed. My parents were informed, and my grandparents were part of this as well.
How old were you?
I was 5 at the time. My abuse began at birth. And I was involved in some church satanic activity. I remember when I was 3 years old, but I was blessed as a baby in a satanic ritual, and then blessed, like again on that superficial, that surface level Mormon presentation as well. So I was born into this and actively involved in cult ritual experiences from birth.
So you were chosen selected
yes.
by one of these top leaders here. Is there a reason why you don't say the person's name? I assume it's a male, but is there a reason why you don't say the person's name or names of the people involved?
At this point, I'm getting more brave, but at this point, the legal system is something that they have that is really refined, just to educate people about the way the Mormon Church operates. there is so much abuse that is unreported, and I'm saying unreported to the public, that it's actually settled outside of the court or even settled through court. It's rare for any abuse case to make it very far into the court system that involves the church, because what happens is the bishops, and these are the local ecclesiastical leaders, the Mormon population, the congregation is instructed to go talk to the bishop and confess sins, or like work through whatever. It's just kind of that leadership line that you start with. So people, women, children, men, whoever it is, parents of a child, or that they have been abused by somebody in the neighborhood, or just even incest in the family. If that report goes to the bishop, the instructions that the bishop has is to call what they call their sexual abuse hotline. You're not to report out to the public or out to the state-run
That's the internal
institutions.
Protocol of the Mormon Church.
It's the internal protocol. So they call the hotline, and the hotline goes right to the church's legal system. Huh. So it goes to Kirtland McConkie, and they've actually reported to the lawyer. So now the church's legal department has it on record, and so they've already encapsulated it right there.
Now the Mormon Church
kept it in-house.
The Mormon Church is worldwide, right? I mean, so how high up is a bishop in the system? I assume the headquarters is in Utah, right?
Correct.
Okay. So is the bishop in Utah? So that's one of the highest levels, or what's the hierarchy? What's the hierarchy here we're talking about?
The bishop is going to be a lay person that's actually called to be in that position. So let's say the congregation is 300 people, and of those 300 people, then there will be 3 men that will be called to kind of preside over those 300 people. The bishop has 2 counselors, so it would be the bishop and his 2 counselors. But they're not religiously trained outside of the Mormon Church. They are basically, they have day jobs. Their day jobs would be to be like, a construction worker or a teacher at the school, or, a banker or whatever. So they have a regular job, and they're volunteering their time to hold or fill that position as an ecclesiastical leader during the week and on the weekends, and preside over meetings on Sunday. Above the bishop is going to be a group called the high. Let's see, what is it? There's the stake presidency and his 2 counselors, and then there's a group of men that also kind of preside over maybe anywhere from 3 to 7 wards, depending on how big the wards are. And the wards are going to be that 300, that congregation of 300. And so there's the high councilmen, and then the stake presidency. And then above the stake presidency is going to be an area authority. Now you're getting up into a higher echelon. And the area authorities also hold the title of an area 70. And the 70s are made up of a quorum that have 70, and there's 2 quorums of 70. And then above that is going to be the general authorities, or the apostles. And there's 12 of them. So 12 apostles or 12 general authorities. They're all men. And then above them are the president or the prophet and his 2 counselors. So the men that run the Mormon Church, there are 15 major players. So the 12 apostles, and then the prophet and his 2 counselors, are the president of the church and his 2 counselors.
Would the prophet be the highest person, or is it kind of like the England, where you have the Queen of England, and then you also have the Prime Minister, who really is?
No, the prophet is the highest. He's going to be the highest leading individual.
So you're saying within that higher echelon, whether it's the 15 or whatever, 20 people, 30 people, one of them was abusing you?
Well, my experience was with at least 10 of them when I was really actively involved in that. That was between I would say around 1972, 73 to 1982, for about 10 years. So formally from 5 years old to 16 years old, I had a lot of interaction with the general authorities and the highest level, the top 3.
Give me some examples of what perhaps the type of abuse. I know it's been a long time for you, and I'm sure through your healing process and counseling that you do too as well, it's probably helped a lot of people. But just so we would know, what are some of the type of abuses that these men would do back then?
So, well, they're still doing it. I know that you're saying back then, but this has gotten more refined. So they're continually practicing this. I am going to publicly declare that one. This is a practice that hasn't died, hasn't finished. It is still actively being practiced and actively done in the temples and other private properties and other church-owned properties. Even there are going to be like state-owned properties as well. It depends on, in Utah, the church and the state kind of really are enmeshed. And so it's all almost the same thing a lot of times. But as far as ceremonies go, wow. They weren't all together all of the time. There were a few times when I was in the company of at least eight of them in one ceremony. Sometimes it was just two that would be present with a number of other attendees. A number of times there would be other children. Sometimes I was the only one. That was more rare, because when they're actually creating these setups, is what I like to call them, these ceremonies and these setups, they can and will terrorize and utilize as many as they need for a ceremony. So there's going to be the use of numbers. So you're going to have 6 children, or you'll have 12 or 9. They go along with those numbers. And it depends, honestly, on a number of things. What is their goal? Are they doing ceremony according to a holiday like Easter? Those were always really brutal. A lot of sacrifice happens then. The satanic calendar, and then also other holidays of that are celebrated. Those are big times. A child or a person's birthday, there's going to be ceremony and trauma around a birthday. There will be, in the state of Utah, there is a holiday that's held on the 24th of July. The 24th of July is when the Utahns celebrate that the pioneers found Utah, arrived in Utah. Brigham Young said, "This is the place, let's settle here." And so not only are there ceremonies that would be done around the 4th of July because of its being a holiday, but then also leading up to the 24th of July. There's a lot of people here in the Mormon church, in the LDS church, in the FLDS church, the fundamental church, because it all leads back to the pioneer heritage. There's going to be a lot of people that have group trauma and individual trauma around that particular holiday. So when it comes to those things, there can be animal sacrifice. There can and will be child sacrifice. Or just human sacrifice. It's not always just children. It can be teenagers. It can be people that have been trying to escape or to tell. I've witnessed a number of different sacrifices and murders where it was told to us that were in the group witnessing it, that person was trying to tell, and they were telling the secrets, or they were trying to escape and get out of the group. And it was reinforced to us that you don't talk about this, or you could be in the same situation. I've seen skinnings where they're skinning somebody alive, and then they finally do slit their throat, or they'll disembowel them or something like that.
In front of the children?
Oh, purposely in front of the children, and also in front of adults too. The adults are also, even if they're there in agreement because they're part of the whole satanic group in a conscious manner, they're not going to escape seeing that trauma. Like, that is part of it. So however they're relating to it, some of them actually really enjoy it. They find energy coming from it. Some of them, I guess, are just neutral about it, but you got to remember that they're also, in their own ways, they've got their own splits and their own relationship to the trauma, to the sacrifices, to the group. Some of them are trying to move up in rank, and so there's protocol on how to move up in those ranks, and a lot of times that includes a killing. And so when it comes to what I saw and what I experienced with these upper echelon people, it involved interactions with high levels, like cardinals of the Catholic Church in secret. It involved working with government officials. It involved crossing borders. It involved, and I'm talking borders from, into Mexico or into other states from state to state, there's going to be a lot of conditioning around the religion itself, especially against the confusion of Jesus, of God, that God never shows up to rescue you, that the one that does show up to rescue you is Lucifer, or somebody that is loyal to Lucifer. I was married off to Lucifer. There's a ceremony for that. There's a ceremony being baptized to Lucifer.
Lucifer's bride ceremony, right?
Lucifer's bride, exactly. Yeah. There's the referral to the Lord. You find that a lot. People talk a lot about that in the Mormon religion. Well, I was praying to the Lord, or I felt the Lord respond, or I felt the Lord, his influence, or the tender mercies of the Lord. That's phrasings that as a human, conscious human, you're going to assign that title to God. But in the underbelly, it's Lord Lucifer, always. And if you have this kind of training, conditioning to hear somebody referring to the Lord somewhere unconsciously, if you don't even know that you have relationship to a satanic ritual, because a lot of people do, but don't know that because they've repressed those memories, they're still going to find themselves hearing that. And some part of them that has been fractured off, and they have parts inside that are loyal to this Lord Lucifer, because out of terror and out of an agreement, you will become loyal that way because that's how you live.
And then you become indoctrinated into the system, and you can perhaps move up in ranks. The more abuse and the more horrific things you experience, the more knowledge you get within the echelon. This is just mind-boggling. But so you're saying on the highest levels in the Mormon Church, it's compromised with SRA. Now, what percentage do you think the Mormon people know, the average rank and file know about this compromised SRA leadership?
I would say it's a very low percentage. The Mormon Church has done a great job of socializing certain things that are SRA related into just average doctrine or practices. And like, just for example, keeping an eye on each other. It can be framed as compassionate service, or we're just checking in on you. In the Mormon Church, you really are never supported by having personal boundaries in a really secure or powerful way. There's a lot of porous boundaries, or even lack of boundaries that are there. So a lot of information is often overgiven. People ask how you're doing, and you find that you're overgiving that, or they're coming into and they're asking you to serve, and you say, I can't, but then they start pushing you into, well, why? Well, we can give you, if you need childcare, we can help. Like, you get corralled into these ways of really giving up your own personal will in a way where you just feel like, oh, well, it's okay, I'm supported. And it's kind of a social mental conditioning.
All you know is all you know.
Exactly. So to answer your question, I think there's more that don't know about it than do. What I do know is more and more people are coming out, like me, that are starting to get their memories, and there are more people becoming disenchanted with the church because of a number of outside agenda things that they are finding or having issue with. They're finding issue over. It could be doctrinal. It could be related to the situation. There's a number of different things that people are starting to become disenchanted and kind of take issue with. So they're starting to look into more and more of, well, what is the church really about, and what's going on behind there? And now that the church has actually been discovered to have over $100 billion just in one investment account, and a lot of that has been from their investment from tithing, and Mormons are really, really loyal to tithing, giving 10% of their income.
Yeah, there was a large investigation that we're reporting on too, with the Underground Railroad, that a court case, one opened up their financials, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and secretly just a backroom deal, everything shut down. No one knows really what happened. It just on a Supreme Court case, which is pretty fascinating. And I think that what that kind of eludes is how powerful, governmental level, powerful the Mormon Church really is. And if what you're saying is true, which I have no reason not to believe you, is that they're interacting with the Catholic churches, the echelon, and It's pretty obvious for people who in the Catholicism have seen the compromising of the Pope and so on down the line, and also with government agencies and military agencies. This network is the long arm of the law, and I can see why a lot of people are not coming out. What's the angle, your perspective then, with Tim Ballard and coming out with his story? Now, he's a Mormon. You have people like Glenn Beck's also a Mormon. They're all supporting this movie and they're getting it out. I'm not saying they're part of the SRA. They could be. Do you have any evidence to believe that they may be? And what's your pause on this?
Ooh, so all of this I'm going to like preview by saying this is just my opinion. I've really got no solid evidence that anybody could, I could even produce and be pressed on, but I can, because of the lifetime experience that I have on seeing the way things are woven together and interconnected. These dots are pretty clear for me. I was personally at the facility, the Underground Railroad facility, back in 2015 for a completely different reason. We were doing a film shoot for something else. We just needed the art director had actually secured one of their offices, this classroom area, for this educational film that I was part of. And so I was on location, and as I was there were some things that kind of got my attention that I thought was a little bit odd. And I'd never really heard of what Underground Railroad was until I started asking some questions. And so there was some of that was coming forward. At the time, I also saw Ed Smart walk through the door, which is Elizabeth Smart's dad. At the time, he was on the board of directors. And that was a red flag for me. What the interaction and the connection was there. I know some people can look at that and say, oh, well, that's that. They're rescuing children and Ed Smart and Elizabeth Smart and that kind of thing. And that would be a scenario or a narrative that they would like you to believe. That has since been dissolved. I know that Elizabeth Smart and Ed Smart are not connected to that group anymore. Whatever has been put out there as to why is just going to be another presented scenario. So that connection was also a really big red flag for me, just because of things that I know behind the scenes with the way this high-level Mormon upper echelon group, sometimes it's called, like the Mormon royalty, that isn't necessarily in the top 15 of the leadership of the church, but it's where different family members are married off into and where they live. And I would say I have a question around that with the Smart family myself. That was part of it. There were some other things that were up and said that kind of raised a flag for me. And then I began following Tim, and I went to a presentation of where he was actually telling people formally about what he was doing, what the organization was about, and just his presentation itself. He's a dynamic speaker, but what he was talking about and what was happening there was really off. It wasn't adding up even emotionally or energetically. He was really working the crowd to get the money, not necessarily educating the crowd about what was going on. So there was that. And then in a really weird way, I'm third person on this one, but I have a girlfriend who was good friends with the CFO's ex-wife, who was full of a lot of information about what was going on at that time. It wasn't a very amicable divorce, and there was a lot of underhanded, unknown things that she was becoming aware of because of the divorce. So, and that's just the top things that I could actually speak to. There's a few other things I could say, yeah, that's not really adding up either. I was personally approached by I don't even know if I want to talk about that part. So I don't know.
All right.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
So I was also approached by an individual that is connected to OUR. A lot of people that I know that have approached him, they were wanting to know about his aftercare for the people that he was rescuing. And there was really never a satisfactory reply or response from him. It seems that they have teamed up with a group up in Logan that is supposed to be creating something for some aftercare. Although they don't necessarily claim to be connected, I've seen the connections. I was personally approached by one of the aftercare representatives who was wanting to recruit me to be part of that group. And based on the way the approach and I want to call it manipulation, and then also being bought off, there was a lot of money that was being thrown around and talked about, and it just didn't add up in the way that they were approaching me, because it was really odd. It was also spelling some things out to me that I thought, okay, is OUR, and I even asked, is OUR involved in this? Because if it is, I'm not part of it. OUR is dirty. I've known that for a long time.
And is it Mormon supported OUR?
I would say 100%. If you want to think about Tim Ballard, and this is just by association, but his last name is the same last name as one of the top, in the top 15, one of the general authorities. There's a Ballard that holds that position. That would be a familial influence, and the Ballard family could be implicated, and Tim himself could be an MK Ultra product. He could be somebody that has been highly programmed to, carry out what's going on, or he could be in agreement with it.
I can see at this point, Asia, with your lifetime experience in the Mormon Church and all the way to the top echelon there. I can see why you would be on pause or hesitant on the legitimacy of OUR and the gang there, if they're actually saving people from sex trafficking, or if they possibly are involved in sex trafficking, especially if the aftercare is questionable. Because what happens to the kids after they're rescued, right? That's one of the probing reasons why people want to know about the aftercare, correct?
That's why if they are connected to this group, then they're even going to be able to control what that is. I do know.
So they get in front of the narrative, and now they control the sex trafficking narrative, you're saying. That could potentially be a reason why this is such a big blockbuster movie.
That's right. And then they want to know, well, how are you helping? And then people are contributing a lot of money, and they're saying, well, this is where the money's going, but it's all foreign. It's all foreign. So are you, as a person that's contributing, going to call the group that they're saying they're contributing to and saying, is this money actually being delivered? Or are you just trusting what's happening that OUR is reporting that they're doing with their money? And the aftercare, if they're connected to this group that I was talking about that's here in Utah, then they've also controlled the aftercare. And I do know that somebody that was involved in OUR itself, not as an external foreign rescue, but there is an internal in-state sex trafficking group. She was part of this. She was trafficked through her dad. She found respite in the home of somebody that I knew. And because of the programming she had and the triggering that kept going on, she kept going back because she kept getting phone calls from her dad. There as a victim that is unhealed, the triggers that put you into places where you make choices and decisions that are actually from traumatic responses, they're all over the board. And so that is still happening. Things like that are going on. And I really want to, we're talking about Tim Ballard here and what the movie itself shows. And I'm really grateful that there's like an exposure, like, hey, guess what? There's
a fantastic movie. It was beautifully done. We interviewed the director. It was just beautifully done. The movie.
Well, it's very, very heartfelt. I mean, it touches your heart when you actually realize, oh my gosh, as a good human that has good moral codes, this is not okay with me. And that's what actually is being played upon, and in some cases, maybe even exploited, because if they're asking you to pull out your pocketbook, you're going to want to help. And they're telling you, here's how you can help, versus you stepping back and saying, how can I realistically help here? If I don't want to just mindlessly put my money somewhere, which is a training in the Mormon Church. You're trained and taught to just give the church 10% of your money and don't worry about it. We'll take care of where it goes. You don't need to worry about any further. God's going to bless you because you gave it to us. It's the same kind of idea. And a lot of times people, that appeals to them because it's so uncomfortable to see something like that. And it's so uncomfortable to feel helpless about that, and yet emotionally charged over it, that it's actually a relief for somebody to tell you how to reply, how to respond. give us your money. Oh, okay, that I know will help. Versus really you stepping back and taking the moment and really owning what it is you want to do. Do I give my attention here? Do I focus a different direction? How can I possibly contribute? Is this what I want to actually support? You know, we don't give ourselves that kind of length of time to do it. And the thing that people don't understand, and I need to bring this in here, the statistics that are being offered are not being offered for people with cases like me. This is for the children that are captured and put into sex trafficking, and it's public, and we're going to find the guy and or the system, and we're going to exploit it and rescue these kids and whatever else we're going to do afterwards. Who knows, right? I would never have been part of that statistic. The children like me that attend these horrendous ceremonies, that have witnessed murders and sacrifices, have had to experience cannibalism and drinking blood and all of these horrible things, even participating in murders ourselves. We are not going to be part of that statistic, because at night we go back home and we're never reported missing. That is not going to be part of this. So if you really want to sit with figures, you're going to need to really up those numbers with the number of people, of children, even of adults that are attending, still being accessed because of all the split personalities, because of the mind control, that are actually considered, and in my opinion, they are considered human traffic victims that are not going to be reported, because they who are delivering them are also family, or who they're staying with, or their trusted handler.
Yeah, where's the
be a grandpa?
Where's the movie for that? A good question,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And so I can see where a country got just overwhelmed. The world just got caught up in the fever of the awakening to the possibility of children being sex trafficked. But it seems like in the underbelly, within our own organizations, within our own country, not somewhere lost in Mexico, there is a darkness so black that most are scared literally to death to expose and to share this information. And of course, there's a few courageous people such as yourself out there, Asia, who are speaking up now and getting more into it. What I do think we need to do is have a part 2, have you come back and talk about healing from this too. However, I do think if you had to say one advice right now for people who are waking up and understanding consciously what they've been through on this level of SRA and MK Ultra, what's your advice?
I would say that they need to be aware, if anybody suspects that they have been accessed by or part of these kinds of formal satanic ritual experiences. Part of what has been installed, and I'm going to say it that way, part of the programming that happens through the trauma, because there's always going to be trauma that involves sexual abuse. The sex part of it, the violation sexually also drives the trauma in farther, so it's harder to access. The thing that also accompanies that is going to be, there's 2 kinds of programming that I believe everybody has, and it's the reporter-recorder programming, and then also the self-elimination or programming. We can talk about that one later, but it's the reporter-recorder that can be really sinister. And that is like it's one of the firewalls that the ritual group that this blood cult actually utilizes. So if you begin to remember, I would say the people that you want to start talking to or telling, or you feel compelled to share with before you say anything to anybody, I would 100% get a journal, get a notebook, get a pen, something that's very personal, and I would start writing these emotions, let these emotions come out. Note to yourself if they are like just overwhelming and compelling, because that's going to be a trigger. You can identify that as a trigger. Or if it's just something that's mild, if there's somebody that you highly, highly trust and you think you want to confide in, before you do that, write that name down and just kind of sit with this. It's going to be very uncomfortable. But the way the recorder-reporter programming works is typically the first person or the group of people you want to tell is going to be your handlers. And when, as a victim, you start telling your handlers what's going on, they will act concerned. They will act loving. They will act like they want to know more because they want to know how much you're remembering. They want to know where you are on this scale to see if you need to be taken back into ceremony and be reprogrammed, or if they can just handle things with a few of the keywords that are typically your trigger words that can kind of put you back into fear or silence or whatever that they can control you with. It may be the more you can educate yourself on your own patterns, the more you're actually going to start seeing your patterns. And that information is yours to share with you. And it's not exactly the easiest, but it's also the most available, because honestly, nobody can solve this problem for you. This is now going to be you championing yourself. And I'm here to validate that. I am here to tell you it's worth it. It's worth every minute of it. It is going to be the most valuable thing you ever do for yourself, but it is also going to be one of the most difficult things you're going to do too. And you're actually freeing yourself.
Yes, and saving your life and how many others, because you have pulled yourself out of that matrix. Well, wonderful, Asia. Thanks for sharing this wisdom. And whether the Underground Railroad or Tim Ballard or anybody else is involved more than just saving kids, that I would say at this point, everything needs to be questioned and looked into deeper. We need to stop looking at a superficial level of a movie coming out and leaving it at that, because the invertedness of the satanic network that has taken over the world, if not has been in charge of the world, is so insidious and so devious and deceiving so many all the time, acting, as you said, as your best friend, but here they are just doing the opposite. We got to have that in the back of our minds as we interact and move forward and look at the deeper meaning of what potentially be going on, if not for our sake of ourselves, but for the sake of our children going forward. So again, thank you, Asia, for sharing this, your experiences and your opinion on what you believe may or may not be happening. So thank you again.
Thank you.